All right, Braves fans, let's get rolling. I'm George McNair, and this is State of the Braves. Well, guys, this week has been actually fairly busy for the Braves. A lot of news has come out, and I want to cover the biggest news, especially of this week, the two big contracts that the Braves have signed, one of them being Chris Sale. Of course, in our last episode, we talked about the Braves trading for Chris Sale, a really big move for them as they're trying to fill out their starting rotation for 2024. And the news of this week is the Braves have signed him to a new contract, basically replacing his old contract that came over with him from Boston. We'll get into the details of that, and I'll give you my take on it in this episode. And then also, soon after that, the Braves extended GM Alex Anthopoulos, and his contract will go now through 2031. So Anthopolos is with the Braves long-term, and I think that's really good news as well. Some minor news also that I just want to mention in Braves country. The Braves signed infielder Luis Guillorme to a one-year, $1.1 million deal. A lot of Braves fans will know Guillorme because he's played for the Mets over the last several seasons. He's definitely a backup infielder, kind of a utility guy. It's interesting that the Braves would sign Guillorme after they added David Fletcher earlier in this offseason. He was kind of thought of as being the utility guy for the Braves, but he does have options. So right now he is on the AAA roster. Maybe the Braves view Fletcher simply as depth. The unique thing about Fletcher is he's making a lot of money. He's overpaid, quite honestly, right now, making about $6.5 million. So that's kind of hard to stash in AAA, but maybe they're willing to do that. Maybe, on paper, these guys are pretty even. They're pretty similar players. So maybe it's simple depth. You got two guys instead of one. Both are solid defensive first infielders. Fletcher has had some flashes of better offense, but it's not consistent. Guillorme is a little more of just a contact hitter. He'll get on base maybe a little bit more than Fletcher, but doesn't give you much power. So, I think adding Guillorme is good. I mean, it's not much money, $1.1 million for a one-year deal. There's literally no risk to that. So he is added to the fold. The Braves also this week avoided arbitration with Max Fried, AJ Minter, and Huascar Ynoa. Of course, Fried is the biggest name, and Minter's a pretty big name as well. Fried will make $15 million this year. AJ Minter will make over $6 million. Huascar Ynoa will make under $1 million. And so, all these guys were going to come back regardless. They were both looking at arbitration. These deals simply avoid arbitration. And I don't know that, some people are going to read into this a little bit more, that maybe this is a good sign that the Braves might extend Max Fried. I don't know that there's anything to that. I think it's generally positive that they don't have to go to arbitration and hash things out. But, guys, I think that Max is, and probably AJ Minter as well, are headed towards free agency at the end of this season. Minter might have a little better opportunity to be extended by the Braves, but regardless, it sure seems like they are headed towards free agency. Huascar Ynoa, he's a guy, by the way, maybe we'll get into this in a later episode, but I think he is a dark horse for being a pretty big figure in the Braves rotation this year. He's been a forgotten man. Of course, went through Tommy John surgery and is now back. But they'll certainly learn a lot this spring training with Huascar Ynoa. And again, just more starting pitching depth. And if he doesn't stick as a starting pitcher, he might also provide some bullpen depth. And then the last bit of Braves news I just want to mention, and you guys might have seen this come across the wire, but Charlie Culbertson, who's been in and around the Braves organization over the last several years, he will stay in the organization, but this year he will attempt to transition from infielder to pitcher, and that's a pretty interesting thing to do, especially at his age. Charlie Culbertson is 35 years old. I think he's basically realized that he's reached the end point of his ability to play in the major leagues as a position player. He literally got one at bat with the Braves last year, which was a single, by the way, but that's all he got. And so now he's trying to transition as a pitcher. And Braves fans probably remember, if you guys are really with it, that he has, appeared in some mop-up duty several times over the last several years and has actually been relatively impressive in those short stints. Most of the time when a position player comes in that kind of situation, they're throwing 50-mile-an-hour lobs up there to the plate. But Charlie has touched over 90 in those appearances and has looked pretty impressive. So to actually have an offseason to prepare as a pitcher, it's kind of interesting. Now, he's only signing a minor league deal. It might come to nothing, right? He might never make a major league appearance again, but I think it's kind of cool that he's trying it. He certainly must love baseball. And, the other thing that I'm just really glad he is staying in the Braves organization. I've always kind of wondered if he might be a future major league coach or maybe even a future manager, and him being in the Braves organization, at the back end of his career, I think is, maybe he'll slide into a coaching position with the Braves at some point. All right, guys. Well, let's go ahead and get into the Chris Sale contract signing. So again, the Braves trade for Chris Sale just about a week ago. And then very quickly after that, just a few days after, they signed him to an entirely new contract that is much more in line with how the Braves tend to do things. He came over with kind of an odd contract situation from Boston. He had $10 million deferred to 2039. So with this new contract, that goes away. The Braves don't tend to do deferrals like that. So the contract details that Sale signed with the Braves. In 2024, he'll make $16 million, which basically means Chris Sale is free to the Braves in 2024. Boston sent $17 million to Atlanta in the deal. Remember, Atlanta sends Vaughn Grissom to Boston, but $17 million comes over from Boston, and Sale actually gets $1 million from Atlanta for being traded. So basically, with his $16 million he'll make from the Braves in 2024, it's a wash for the Braves financially for 2024, which is really interesting. It probably gives them some more financial flexibility. I would especially assume that if the Braves need to make a move at the trade deadline this season, I feel like it gives the Braves more flexibility to do that. In 2025, Sale will be guaranteed $22 million, and that's the real risk of this new contract. His old contract, 2025, was a team option, basically. And now it's, the Braves are guaranteeing it. And yes, there's more risk to that. We all know that Sale has been, over the last several years, injured a lot, injury prone, whatever you want to call it. I dove into that a good bit in the last episode. So that still exists. But, I think the Braves and Alex Anthopoulos like to show faith in players. And I think there's a lot of this that is a sign and a message to Chris Sale that we want you here. And we believe that, you're going to be good for us. And that probably, it might not mean that he will be good for them or that he will be healthy, but I'm sure it gives him a boost of confidence that the Braves are willing to commit to him. And of course, it also gives him some assurances that he is in Atlanta for more than just a year. And I think for any guy that you can get more comfortable, you can commit to an organization, you can get to know your teammates better, right? You can just kind of sink in and get more comfortable with where you are. You are a Brave for more than a year, and potentially even 3 years. So the back end of this deal, 2026, is an $18 million club option with no buyout, which is pretty typical for what the Braves do as well. So it's a pure club option for 2026. If all goes well in the first 2 years of the contract, $18 million for a 37-year-old Chris Sale, who potentially hasn't been injured, is actually a great deal. So, the other thing that this helps with the Braves is it reduces Sale's average annual value from $27.5 million to $18 million. What that basically means is their CBT number reduces by about $7 to $8 million. And that's where they are. They're below the last or the third tier of the CBT penalties. Not to get too complicated with that, but if the Braves were to be over that number, they would drop, or they would have to move back 10 spots in the 2025 draft for their first round pick. So there are some penalties that are real. I'm kind of assuming they're going to want to keep under that. The Braves don't really talk about that outwardly. I mean, I could say that, and then they could bring in some guy for $10 million, go over that number, and obviously the sign would be that they don't care about that number. But until they go over that number, it would seem to make sense that they would want to stay under it. And I think part of this this new contract for Sale is showing you that, right? It's hinting at that they probably want to stay under that number. So obviously, Anthopolos is clearly comfortable enough with Sale's current health to give him a guaranteed second year. If Sale remains relatively healthy, this also helps cover the potential exit of Fried and Morton after 2024. So having Sale in the fold for 2 or even potentially 3 years, right? It does give you that additional starter. And that's really important when we're looking at the exit of Fried and Morton, which is very likely to happen. Not guaranteed, but likely. So, both after this deal was done, Alex Anthopoulos and Chris Sale have given long-form interviews to different podcasts and radio programs, and I was able to watch a couple of those. I want to give you my thoughts and takeaways from both of these guys. And really, the messaging is pretty similar, but obviously from 2 different perspectives. So the first one is, the low expectations but high ceiling of this deal for Sale. The Braves are already a great team, right? Without Sale, they're a playoff team. They're arguably with the Dodgers, the best team in baseball. But they're not relying on Sale to be a 1 or 2 in their rotation. They're basically asking him to be a 3 or a 4, which he's never had to, he's always had to worry about being an ace of a staff or the second guy maybe. And he mentioned this in his interview on the Foul Territory podcast, that he gets to be a 3 or 4, and that's not a bad thing. It's there's some comfort to that. Not that he is shying away from pressure. He's not that kind of player, but it's just the reality of him entering a Braves system where there's a lot of talent in front of him. But if he is healthy, when the playoffs come around, even if he's your 3 or 4 during the season and maybe even a low innings guy or missing a few starts here and there, if he's around for the playoffs, he can be a big time starter. He can shut down teams. And again, I mentioned this last time, but coming from the left side, right, he can shut down some of those great lefties that the Braves are going to have to face in the playoffs. So you can have low expectations for Sale in terms of what he might give you in the regular season. Reality is you don't necessarily need a ton from him in the regular season. Anything you get, it's gravy, right? It's the cherry on top, but it's this high ceiling of what he could give you in the playoffs that is really attractive. And Anthopolos basically has said this over and over again. This is a playoff caliber starter. He's, he's pitched the final out of a World Series. He's been there, done that. And he could potentially do it again for the Braves. The next thing that Anthopolos wanted to express in a lot of these interviews is that Chris Sale's arm appears to be very healthy. Chris Sale is 3+ years removed from Tommy John surgery, and this is his first regular offseason since 2018. And don't underestimate how important that is for a pitcher. Sale mentioned this in his interviews, that he hasn't had this regular offseason for a long time. Yes, he's dealt with all these injuries, and because of those little injuries, he's really been precluded from being able to have a normal offseason that pitchers really lean on. And so now he's going to be able to do that. So it doesn't guarantee health, but it sets him up probably as well as possible to have a good 2024. The next piece is something I mentioned last episode, the state of the pitching market, right? The state of the pitching market in baseball right now is nuts. And it really is because supply and demand, right? The supply for great pitching is limited. So even below average starters are getting big money right now, or guys who've been really, really injured. And so the fact is that getting a guy of the caliber of Chris Sale, even though he's been injured a good bit, the the price that the Braves were able to get him for is really a no-brainer, and it's a big win for the Braves given the current market. My other takeaway is one that Anthopolos has mentioned a little bit, but I think is really true just based off of his actions. The Braves believe in A.J. Smith-Shawver and Hurston Waldrop and didn't want to give them up for maybe a different starter, a guy that you could say would be a little more reliable to be on the mound, and hasn't had these injury issues, right? So I think the Braves really believe in these two guys who will probably start at AAA next season. Their ability, I think the Braves really also believe in their own ability to develop pitchers. And they've had some good success with that over the last several years. So I think it's very likely that we will see both Smith-Shawver and Hurston Waldrop in 2024 with the Braves. It might not be that they're slotting into the starting rotation for good, but I think it's very likely that they will be needed for spot starts maybe. But as of 2025, I think it's incredibly likely that at least one of them enters the rotation on a full-time basis. And, let's not underestimate the value of Chris Sale and still Charlie Morton as these two veterans and their influence on young pitchers and the development of these young pitchers. So I just think it's awesome that guys like Smith-Shawver and Waldrop can be in spring training, be in the dugout with a Charlie Morton, with a Chris Sale. I just think it's going to be awesome for them. The last thing I take away from the Chris Sale interview is this guy is a motivated player. He is a true competitor, and he's a really good teammate. I mean, he was being interviewed by A.J. Pierzynski and some other former teammates, and they obviously love the guy. They obviously respect him greatly. Alex Anthopoulos also just said over and over again how much, they check in on guys. They care about who they're bringing into the clubhouse, and Chris Sale was just, A+ in terms of what his former teammates thought of him. So Sale is known. He's very well known as being a really salty competitor, but a guy that his teammates know is going out and giving them his best every time. And he also doesn't shy away from a responsibility. Sale will go to the mic. If he has a bad start, he'll tell you exactly what happened. He'll talk about these lost seasons he's had in Boston, and he doesn't make excuses. He just said, well, that was kind of a failure on my part, and I got to live with it, but I want to, get back on the mound and do what it takes to do that. So I really just think he is a great fit for the Braves clubhouse. And looking back, everything that most of us said after the disappointing exit from the playoffs this year was, the Braves need a nasty strikeout pitcher, that, a third starter, and they need a guy with an edge in the clubhouse. He can bring an edge to the clubhouse. And that's Chris Sale, right? He fits those things to a T. So again, it really is about his health. He's got to be on the mound to do it. But I have some positive thoughts on this move, and I really like what Alex Anthopoulos did. So guys, let's move on to Alex Anthopoulos himself, right? He gets his own contract extension this week that will go through 2031. So he was basically coming up on his final year being under contract with the Braves, which was not a great situation because he's clearly a top 3 GM across baseball, maybe the best GM in baseball. And he's been really good since he's been with the Braves, and I want to go through that a little bit. But the Braves lock him up through 2031, which is a really long contract for a GM. So just as a brief history of Alex, if you don't know much about how he came to the Braves, he came to the Braves on the heels of what was a pretty embarrassing punishment that came down from Major League Baseball that saw former Braves GM John Coppolella banned from baseball. The Braves had several other penalties handed down to them. I still think a lot of those penalties were pretty heavy-handed from MLB, but all that being said, the Braves were not in good straits at that time. They were coming off of a rebuild and 3 or 4 really bad seasons. and they were incredibly fortunate to land Anthopolos, who was probably at the time the hottest GM candidate in baseball. He had a good track record for several seasons with the Blue Jays, had made the playoffs several times, and then had moved on to the Dodgers, and he was basically like the assistant GM there for 2 years. And so when the Braves hired him, right, they were on the upswing. There was kind of light at the end of the tunnel of their rebuild. But since Anthopolos has been with the Braves, they have won 6 straight National League East Division titles, and of course the 2021 World Series under his watch. Anthopolos has also navigated the Braves really well through these MLB imposed penalties that were, handed down because of the John Coppolella era, and the Braves are now past that, and so now they're going to have the ability to hopefully perform well in the international signing market, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they do that under Anthopolos. But he got a 7-year contract extension, which is really it's abnormally long for general managers. Most extensions for GMs are like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, but Anthopolos gets a 7-year extension, which certainly expresses the Braves' confidence in him. And he definitely deserves it. He is only 46 years old, guys. And so he's set up to be with the Braves these 7 years and maybe far beyond that. And the Braves are certainly set up for long-term success, which he has played a huge role in setting that up. So it's just very good stuff all the way around. One thing I have noticed about Alex is he is very introspective about his previous decisions, including the mistakes he's made. I think it was really helpful because he had this experience in Toronto. He had some good moments. He had some things that he'll admit he should have done differently. He was able to see an organization run really well with the Dodgers, and then he comes over to the Braves. So I think he was just perfectly prepared for success. And one thing he's talked a lot about is, in compiling a team, it's not just about analytics. Like, players aren't just cogs in a machine. They're human beings, and you have to be able to create a really healthy environment for them to succeed. So, he really trusts analytics and he uses analytics. So he's new school in that way. But I think he's also old school in making sure that guys get along with each other, that their personalities fit in the clubhouse. I think he's very thoughtful about that. And really, I think that makes everybody that much better, right? And I think we've seen that for the most part throughout his tenure. Not every piece of the Braves was brought in by Anthopolos. I mean, honestly, John Coppolella did do a pretty good job of drafting some guys like, like Austin Riley and several others. But what Anthopolos has done since he's been in Atlanta is he's recognized these players. He's locked a ton of them up through extensions, and really now the Braves team, the current Braves team, is Alex Anthopoulos' team, right? Either through extensions or through being drafted by Anthopolos or traded, and brought over to the Braves by Anthopolos. It's really his team. And so moving forward, he's going to continue to obviously tweak things, but he's the man in charge. And I have a lot of confidence in him. There's been some moves that in the moment I didn't fully agree with him on. Probably the Freddie Freeman one was the biggest one for me that I look back on. And honestly, that one's worked out just fine for the Braves. I think that one is, if you were just simply choosing between Freeman and Olson, you're not going to go wrong. And obviously, Matt Olson has really proven himself as a great Brave as well. And so I'm really glad he's with Atlanta. And I think probably Anthopolos made did the best with what he was presented with at the time, even though I would have wanted Freddie back. But that being said, there aren't a lot of mistakes, big mistakes, that Anthopolos has made. I was looking at MLB Trade Rumors when they reported on this, and I think the only big mistake they could find from Anthopolos' tenure was the Braves released Kevin Gausman as he was struggling. But everything about Kevin Gausman in 2018, it was downward, right? And now he's kind of turned his career around and is one of the best pitchers in the American League. But that's kind of it. I mean, most of the decisions he's made has worked out. The guys he's chosen not to extend, especially the Dansby Swanson thing, is probably looking better and better with each passing year. So, Anthopolos is, I think, guys, in terms of all the things that have happened over this offseason, this might be one of the most important things that has happened, especially for the long-term future and health of the Atlanta Braves, is that Anthopolos is not going to be poached by some other team. He probably, if he was a free agent GM, he could probably go wherever he wanted to outside of maybe LA. And he's not going anywhere. He's with the Braves. And so that's really good stuff. When I think through, what the big decisions he might have to make in the near future, the only position he might have to address next year is a DH. That's kind of iffy. Ozuna has one more option year after 2024, so it's just going to probably be up to whether Ozuna has a good year or not. Travis d'Arnaud also has a 2025 option, and then maybe shortstop could be addressed if Arcia hits the skids, doesn't play well in 2024. So there could be a few things positionally, but for the most part, right, the Braves are in pretty good shape positionally. I think it will just continue to be in the near future about the starting rotation. How the Braves draft, develop, and fill out the rotation is probably going to be the biggest job for Anthopolos in the near future. Extending Ronald Acuna has to be on his radar as well. I don't know if that will happen or how soon it might happen, but I'm sure it's in his mind as something he wants to do. Replacing Brian Snitker, I'm not saying right now, but who knows how long Snitker is going to continue to manage. And if Anthopolos is going to be around for 7 years, that's probably a decision he'll eventually have to tackle. But all that being said, the Braves are, of course, as we know, set up super well to vie for championships. And Anthopolos has a ton to do with that, and he will continue to have a ton to do with it. And I'm really glad he's one of the really the biggest decision maker in the room for the Braves. He brings a lot of confidence, I think, to Braves fans. All right, guys. Well, that's all I've got for you in this episode of State of the Braves. Thanks for tuning in. And next time I'm going to bring a special episode of the State of the Braves, as I'm going to dive into some of my favorite Braves of all time, but non-stars, right? So they can't be an all-star, like multiple-time all-star or a Hall of Famer, Braves Hall of Famer. But I want to kind of look in the past. And if you've been a Braves fan for a really long time, I think you'll like this episode coming up, as it's just kind of a retrospective of maybe some Braves you haven't thought about in a while. And I'm sure you guys have your own favorite Braves over the years. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you soon.